and welcome to W.A.R, War, Work and Rest. This is week 12, believe it or not, and over there are the links. You can get onto any of the other sermons I've preached on the series. I'm continuing with the rest part, and I want to talk about this question. What is going on in our own hearts sometimes? Because that's often why we can't rest. And so my title for today is Check Yourself, with a capital S. Check yourself. The text we're going to look at is, or launch from, is Luke chapter 15 from verse 22. Let me just read it. But the father said to his servants, "Quick, bring the best robe, put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." So they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the oldest son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. "Your brother has come," he replied, "and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound." The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, "Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and have never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him." "My son," the father said, "you are always with me. Everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." Something very unattractive is operating in the older brother's heart. He just can't bring himself to go to the celebration of his wayward brother's return. He is stuck in the injustice of it all. There's envy hidden away in his heart. As was written long ago, envy hates to see other men happy. It begins by asking plausibly, "Why should I not enjoy what others enjoy?" And it ends by demanding, "Why should others enjoy what I may not?" Envy is the great leveler. If it cannot level things up, it will level them down. And the words constantly in its mouth are, "my rights and my wrongs." The oldest son thinks he has been wronged. He's envious and he's offended. He's comparing his life to his brother's, and everything turns ugly from there. We are living in a very unique time in the history of our country, where through the self, the inner self, there is a response where everything's busy turning ugly because of this curse of comparison, where we're looking at what others have. We're looking at what others don't have. We're looking at the responses of others, whatever they may be. And the only place most of us are not looking is into ourselves. Do you know there's a direct link between the rise of envy, depression, and the use of social media? A lot of research has been done on this, and here's an extract from a review of 6 studies summarized in Forbes magazine. And I quote, "Part of the reason Facebook makes people feel socially isolated, even though they may not actually be, is the comparison factor. We fall into the trap of comparing ourselves to others as we scroll through our feeds and make judgments about how we measure up. One study looked at how we make comparisons to others' posts in upward or downward directions. That is, feeling that we're either better or worse off than our friends. It turned out that both types of comparisons made people feel worse, which is surprising, since in real life, only upward comparisons, feeling another person has it better than you, makes people feel bad. But in the social network world, it seems that any kind of comparison is linked to depressive symptoms. It's no secret that the comparison factor in social media leads to jealousy. Most people will admit that seeing other people's tropical vacations and perfectly behaved kids is envy-inducing. Studies have certainly shown that social media use triggers feelings of jealousy. The authors of one study, looking at jealousy and other negative feelings while using Facebook, wrote that This magnitude of envy incidences taking place on Facebook alone is astounding, providing evidence that Facebook offers a breeding ground for invidious feelings. They add that it can become a vicious cycle. Feeling jealous can also make a person want to make his or own life look better and post jealousy-inducing posts of their own in an endless circle of one-upping and feeling jealous. This is yet one more bit of evidence that there's quite a bit of the older brother living inside each of us. Research seems to show that envy first brings depression. My life isn't as good as yours. Then comes offense. Why should I have, or why should you have, what I don't have? Then it degrades into hatred. We can say that our culture currently is characterized by the offended self. Psychologists call this the online disinhibition effect, in which factors like anonymity, invisibility, lack of authority, and not communicating in real time struggle away at the mores society spent millennia building. And it's seeping from our smartphones into every aspect of our lives. What's currently going on in our country has seeped right through, where on both sides of the spectrum, the self is being elevated at the cost of the mores of society that we've built for a very long time. And things are busy coming down because people are not dealing with the self. So here's some points for today. Number one, be gentle. In my preach, I'm not trying to offer a social critique regarding our current events. In terms of resting, what I'm wanting to do is to help us make room in our souls for the God we love. We've got to clear out debris. We've got to try to experience so much more of Him. We see in the text we read this today that the older brother cannot receive the father's generosity because he's closed off, he's curtained off by his attention to himself. This is the hidden danger of the stubborn life of the self, the exalted me, that which is unsubmitted and unsurrendered to the rule of Jesus Christ inside me. Over time, through our lives, the self stakes out its own territory within us to assure that it's going to get its own way. It wants to order our world to its likings. It embeds assumptions and privileges in our psyche. There is a momentum shift towards its desires, its motives, and its presence in us. And we call this the self-life. It's the self-life in us that so easily takes offense and that enjoys taking offense. It wants things done our way. So it's continually making demands. Because, of course, our demands are entirely reasonable and justified. You see, the self-life doesn't like being interrupted, cut off on the highway, being told what to do or how to do things. It hates it when someone corrects our driving, our typing, our cooking, our performance. It hates it when others have what we don't have. It's the self-life in us that keeps a solid record of wrongs, holds those imaginary conversations with people we would just love to put right, crafts those devastating emails we only wish we could send to others. And in church life, the self has a religious veneer to it as well. It gets irritated when a prayer time goes on too long for their liking, when church services don't follow the usual pattern, when worship or words go on too long. The self in church life fully expects that when it joins a grow group, they will be asked how they're doing, and all attention should be focused fully on them. The self life doesn't think too much about the return of Jesus. It's way too focused on the here and the now. And am I getting what I feel I deserve? And it gets irritated when it hears that God may well only bless us with what we want in the hereafter and not right now. Here's an honest question for you. Are you recognizing any of the self-life symptoms in you? One of the great embarrassments in Christianity is how some people who have aligned themselves publicly with Jesus still act in vain, selfish, rude, stupid, pompous, and hateful ways. The simple explanation is that they have chosen to continue to live from the position of the self-life. The reality is that our enemy can have a secret hold in every single one of us, an access point from within. This trapdoor in everybody's life comes through the self-life. Satan's fall was because he chose to exalt himself over God. The Bible says in Isaiah chapter 14 from verse 12, "How you have fallen from heaven, O morning star, son of the dawn. You have been cast down to the earth, you who once laid low the nations. You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit enthroned on the mount of assembly, on the utmost heights of the sacred mountain. I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. But you are brought down to the grave, to the depths of the pit. Those who see you stare at you. They ponder your fate. Is this the man who shook the earth and made kingdoms tremble? The man who made the world a desert, who overthrew its cities and would not let his captives go home?" Friends, we're describing Satan. And it seems that he later on found in humanity something of the same weakness that he had in himself, stubbornness and self-centeredness. And he leveraged it in Eden and always after to get us to follow his lead. We choose to disobey God and reach out for what we want. And we exalt ourselves over our Creator Father and over his will and over his desires for us. Many of us have replaced God with self on the throne of our lives. And let me just say to you right now, the devil doesn't care what your personal sins are. He doesn't even care how he gets you to stumble or how he gets you to retreat. What he delights in is this internal access he has, this precious self that we're always protecting. And for as long as we are entertaining and pampering the self, letting it have its way, we crowd out the life of God. We're like the older brother standing outside of the party, blind to his father's love, aggressive, uncontented, because nothing's working our way. We're not getting what we want. And that's what my first point was. You need to learn to be gentle. Slow it down. From Galatians 5, you've been given a spirit of gentleness. Slow it down. Don't listen to that voice. Begin to allow calm waters around you. And say, okay, Lord, begin to speak to me about me. Be gentle. Number 2, I only have 2 points, is find relief. Talking about the self-life can be difficult, confusing, especially for that brand of hardcore Christianity that basically says anything connected to your humanity is the self-life and must be crucified. Actually, God says he will give us the desires of our hearts. And he says to us to protect our hearts because life springs out from that place. God doesn't want you to kill your desires and your dreams. He just wants to channel them correctly for you. There is a part of the self-life that you need to understand that God has put in there for you, for your sake, that you may grow into a fullness of him. He's talking about that side which raises itself up against his authority in your life. You see, Jesus always handled the broken and the misguided graciously with a view toward their restoration. The incarnation of Jesus itself meant to show us that God loves us and God cherishes our humanity because he took our humanity upon himself in order to redeem us. Your personal humanity isn't the problem. The issue is who's on the throne or who's in the driving seat of your life. Who or what is fueling and motivating your choices and your desires? Who are you allowing to drive the bus of your life? When we let self rule, it obscures our awareness of God. It limits our ability to receive him. The self-life is a massive burden to bear. I want to tell you that the self was never meant to be master. And when we make it the master, we open ourselves up to all sorts of heartache in our lives. Pressure mounts because now the control of life is up to me. I become the master of my own destiny. And it becomes heavy because suddenly I'm on my own. I mean, I can't even control the next 5 minutes of my life, never mind the rest of my life. So much happens beyond my control that comes into my world. How do I order it right now when things are chaotic? The self-life doesn't have an answer for you. Fear and anxiety follows, and unforgiveness, resentment, they're all on the doorstep. It becomes about my rights and my wrongs, and I get caught up in the drama of what's happening around us at the moment. I want to tell you, the self will disappoint you every time. It causes you and I to do things which we later regret. And so we need to deal with this self-life that always tries to rise up. C.S. Lewis wrote, "Now, the self can be regarded in two ways. On the one hand, it is God's creature, an occasion of love and rejoicing. Now, indeed, hateful in condition, but to be pitied and healed. On the other hand, it is that one self of all others, which is called I and me, and which on that ground puts forward an irrational claim to preference. The claim is not only to be hated, but simply killed." You see, Jesus said we must crucify the rule of self in ourselves quickly. And I want to look at how we do that. So I only had those 2 points, and now I want to get to the heart of the matter. How do we deal with self? If you're a fan of the Narnia series, you may remember that little brat, Eustace, who pitches up in the Voyage of the Dawn Treader. He's a horrible, obnoxious little twerp who can only ever see the world through the eyes of his offended self. Eustace always feels cheated and wronged, and he's given the smallest portions and the hardest chores. He's denied his rights at every turn. One day, when he's trying to shirk his responsibilities, he stumbles on a dragon's treasure, and he covets it with his tiny little self-centered heart, and his envy and his pride and his greed swells up to dragon size. And if you've watched the movie or read the book, next thing he becomes a dragon himself. At first, he loves the thought of finally being able to get even with all the people he believes have been unfair to him. But being a dragon, when you're meant to be a boy, is a very sad life, and Eustace weeps some bitter tears over his condition. I want to read to you from the book. He wanted to get back among humans and talk and laugh and share things. He realized that he was a monster cut off from the whole human race. An appalling loneliness came over him. He began to see that the others had not really been fiends at all. He began to wonder if he himself had been such a nice person as he has always supposed. He longed for their voices. He would have been grateful for a kind word even from Reepicheep. Reepicheep is a character that Eustace thoroughly disliked. When he thought of this, the poor dragon that had been Eustace lifted up its voice and wept. A powerful dragon, crying its eyes out, under the moon in a deserted valley, is a sight and a sound hard to be imagined. Now, these are probably the first healthy feelings this young Eustace had ever had. You see, he had become a dragon through the choices of his self-life, and now he needed to be undragoned. But no matter how much he clawed at his own scales, he couldn't get rid of his dragonness. Only the great lion, Aslan, which of course is the picture of Jesus, could do it for him, and it hurt and was wonderful. And I quote again, "I was afraid of his claws, I can tell you, but I was pretty nearly desperate now, so I just lay flat down on my back and let him do it. The very first tear he made was so deep that I thought it had gone right into my heart. And when he began pulling the skin off, it hurt worse than anything I've ever felt. The only thing that made me able to bear it was just the pleasure of feeling the stuff peel off. You know, if you've never picked the scab of a sore place, if you've picked the scab of a sore place. It hurts like billy-o, but it is such fun to see it coming away. Well, he peeled the beastly stuff right off, just as I thought I'd done it myself the other 3 times. Only they hadn't hurt. And there it was, lying on the grass. Only ever so much thicker and darker and more knobbly looking than the others had been. And there was I, as smooth and soft as a peeled switch, and smaller than I had been. Then he caught hold of me. I didn't like that very much, for I was very tender underneath now that I had no skin on, and threw me into the water. It smarted like anything, but only for a moment. After that, it became perfectly delicious, and as soon as I started swimming and splashing, I found that all the pain had gone from my arm. And then I saw why. I'd turned into a boy again. Now, that's a long description I just gave you, but it's a wonderful description of a little boy who'd been freed from the tyranny of a self-life. That which he was inside, a nasty little dragon, he became on the outside, and only when he turned to the great lion Aslan, who peeled away this self from him and revealed the inner core of a beautiful little boy again, only then did he begin to experience the beauty of the world. And this is C.S. Lewis trying to describe to you and I the fact that the self-life demonstrated on the outside is a reflection of the self-life on the inside that you don't make peace with, because it is a trapdoor for the enemy to get in and express himself. Instead, he says it needs to be peeled off. The self-life needs to be broken from us. What he's trying to do is give us a picture of the verses where Jesus talks about being crucified to the old self, the self-life. Matthew 10:38, and anyone who does not take his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Matthew 16, verse 24, then Jesus said to his disciples, if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. Mark 8:34-36, then he called the crowd to him along with his disciples and said, if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for me and for the gospel will save it. What good is it for a man to gain the whole world, yet forfeit his soul? Luke 9:23-24, then he said to them all, if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for me will save it. Luke 14:27, and anyone who does not carry his cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. Can you see how Jesus is being so emphatic? Because he wants you and I to experience fullness, freedom, joy. The kind that's only found when we're full of him and not of ourselves. George MacDonald, in trying to help us understand how to crucify the old flesh, put it like this. It is not to thwart or tease the old poor self, Jesus tells us. That was not the purpose for which God gave it to us. He tells us that we must leave it altogether, yield it, deny it, refuse it, lose it. Thus only shall we save it. Thus only have a share in our own being. The self is given to us that we may sacrifice it. It is ours that we, like Christ, may have something to offer. Not that we should torment it, but that we should deny it, refuse, abandon, deny altogether self as a ruling or determining or originating element in us. Friends, what we're trying to do is we're trying to turn ourselves over to Jesus, to obey him, to surrender to him, relinquishing our rights over to him. How do we do that? I started off with a story of an older brother who has had a wasteful or a prodigal brother who has gone off and squandered his father's inheritance. He's come back, and his father has welcomed him into the home, and he's put a robe on him and a ring, and he's celebrated, and he's loved his son. And the faithful son, who is sitting on the outside, looking in, saying, why have I not been treated like this? Immediately, envy rises, and I want to know why he's been given what I haven't. Jesus gives us a picture of how the older brother could have relinquished that self-life, how he could have gone into the house and experienced his father's embrace. He could have experienced everything being his. And here you've got an older brother who is the inheritor of everything, but who can't experience it because he keeps himself on the outside because of what's going on in his own heart. And what Jesus does is he shows us how practically, in two very simple ways, how he was given an opportunity to kill the self-life in him. The first is just admire and be grateful. He should have admired his father's love. And he should have been grateful that his brother had come back home. You and I need to practice admiration and gratitude towards others. If you want to be gentle and you want to find relief for your soul, if you want to make wide open space for God to get within you, you need to start being grateful for what God's doing in others. It kills the self-life because it stops it being about you. Pray for people who are in a better situation than you. Those who are more gifted than you are. Those who have wonderful circumstances coming their way. The point is that envy and self-life struggles to coexist with an attitude of admiration and gratitude. Rejoice when others are rejoicing. Pray for someone else's promotion, their pregnancy, their healing. This stuff crucifies envy. Just be grateful for what God's doing with others. Celebrate their successes. Second thing, close the door to offense. That older brother should have looked at everything that could have caused offense in him and said, actually, I'm the older brother. I'm loved. I'm cared for. My father trusts me with everything. Let me get over the fact very quickly that my brother's being honored like this. We breathe toxic relational air in our generation. Whenever you sense offense coming your way or cropping up in you, run a mile in your heart. The problem with offense is it can be utterly justified. People do offensive things to us. There are just naturally offensive people out there. Don't get caught up in it. Offense never ever has a good ending. Don't get offended when others get what you don't, or when you feel you're being left out. It is a wonderful opportunity by God to tear off the scales of the dragon of the self-life. The Christian life works through total abandonment. Young Eustace couldn't keep a bit of dragon and a bit of boy. He was one or the other. You have to be all in for your heart to experience the life and the presence of God. If we hold anything back, if we retain some small part of our lives for ourselves, the self will rule again and set itself up against God in us. The Bible teaches us that a house divided cannot stand. Most Christians, if they're honest with you, who experience serious disappointment in their lives, will tell you that the origin of that disappointment was because they made decisions where they allowed the self-life to determine a course of action instead of one that lives for the benefit of others. And they would have to admit that in that moment, they were not living fully abandoned to God. There is no other way to put it except the way Jesus did, so brilliantly and so simply in Luke 17:33. Whoever tries to keep his life will lose it. And whoever loses his life will preserve it. Free yourself today from the culture of comparison, of envy, and offense that fills this land. Decide not to swim in it any longer. Let God truly be God in your life. Let Jesus take control of operations. Let him take the lead. Let him, by the Holy Spirit, take you forward, and watch how quickly the self disappears into the sunset. And you will walk this life in a freedom and a joy you never thought possible. I encourage you to surrender your self-life over to the Lord and say, Lord, let your life live in me. Your soul will rest. God bless you. Thank you so much for being a part of our meeting today. Can I just ask two things? The first is, if today the message is in any way being useful to you, would you mind just maybe liking it or putting perhaps a statement down or a comment down that we can know how the ministry has helped you? Maybe a thumbs up, maybe you can subscribe to the channel, do whatever, just so we can know what impact this message may be having on you. And secondly, you may be someone who's saying, Greg, I hear you, and this hope that Jesus has for us can come into my heart and it can change me. But the reality is that I don't even know if I know Jesus. I want to say two things to you right away. The first is, he's near you right now. The Bible says if you believe in your heart that he is the Lord, and if you confess him with your mouth, you will be saved. Which means you just need to, where you are, turn to the Lord Jesus Christ, even now, and just say, Lord, here I am. I recognize who you are. I confess my sin to you. I acknowledge you as Jesus Christ, the Lord of all, the Son of the living God. And I want to follow you. I want to become a disciple of yours. I want to give my life to you, Lord. And you can pray that prayer right now between you and the Lord. Secondly, you can get hold of us. You can see the telephone number. You can get hold of us and say, hey, I've given my life to the Lord. Can you help me from here on out? And we could either send you some material. We can put you in touch with a really good church near you. If you live in our area, you can come to us. You can follow us on YouTube. But it is good to get connected into the family of God, to get connected into a local church, that your life changes being surrounded with the family of God. Please stay in touch. God bless you.